Welcome. My name is Ann Herrmann-Nehdi, CEO of Herrmann International, a company that is focused on helping individuals, teams, and organizations around the world get better results through better thinking. I'm delighted to share the findings of our 25 years of research on thinking in the brain to help you understand why challenging assumptions is so key to innovation. Part of what we've learned is that the way your brain actually is processing information is really part of the challenge. And in this module, we'll look at ways that you can better understand not only what it is that's happening in your head, use a model that can help facilitate clarifying that, and then finally, you'll get a toolkit that you can use as part of your Spark project or any challenge that you might be facing as you look at innovation. So let's get started. Let's get started with a definition of what we mean by assume. Coming from the Latin, it means to take something for granted, to suppose it's true. And this word truth is really important to understanding why assumptions can be so dangerous. Assuming is a natural process. It's part of what makes us really efficient in our decision making, helps us move faster. But when it comes to innovation, assumptions really must be challenged. What we believe to be true is actually often based on past experience that may or may not be valid for the current situation. I'd like to share with you this little ad from Sweden that I think will demonstrate that just perfectly. Another definition of assumption that you may have already heard is when you assume things, you make an ass out of you and me. And I think that commercial really showed that to be true. To demonstrate the danger of assumptions in a business setting, let's take a look at a case study example that really was very costly. A large lighting company has a key product that is a roadway light, one that you would see every day as you're driving at night. They were losing market share. Costs had been driven down from $80 to $40. And the plant that we were working with basically had decided, it's impossible for us to get to that price without moving production overseas, just like every single one of our competitors has done. So that was their core truth. Impossible to reduce the cost by another $10 to remain competitive if we maintain production here in the U.S. Part of what happened is an ad hoc group formed because they really felt that they wanted to challenge that assumption because they cared about keeping production here in the States at that local plant and felt that they could really come up with a better solution. After several sessions, they were actually able to get the cost down not only by $10, but by another $5 for a total of $15. Unfortunately, it was too late. The decision had been made, production was moving overseas, and it went off. And they were pretty frustrated with that. What's ironic is that now, several years later, they discovered that the quality control issues in their overseas production were such that their share issues in terms of the marketplace were even greater than they'd been before. And now they're moving production back to the plant in the U.S. Had they challenged that core assumption and been willing to go with that earlier on, they could have saved more than $50 million in sales. Opportunity costs not even part of that, due to some of the momentum that they lost due to the quality issues. So there are consequences to this. You've got to be careful to not get stuck with your assumptions. You really hit a roadblock mentally, because what happens is our assumptions start to limit our thinking, send us down the wrong path, and basically set a roadblock up that gives us the total impression that there really is no other solution, that what it is that we are thinking is true. Even smart people have this happen. Here's some classic examples of very capable people coming to completely inappropriate conclusions. In 1878, Oxford University, in looking at the electric light, Professor Erasmus Wilson predicted that the electric light would not be heard of in the future, that it would just disappear, that it really was not something that we would see. And I think it's very ironic that the light bulb is such a common metaphor for creativity and innovation today in light of that comment. Or Albert Einstein, renowned physicist, declared in 1932, there is not the slightest indication that nuclear energy will ever be obtainable. It would mean that the atom would have to be shattered at will. Finally, in 1969, Margaret Thatcher actually declared, a woman prime minister? Not in my time. Hard to believe that not only would she debunk that, along with many other women, in fact, a total of 40 women prime ministers, including Ms. Thatcher. So we have to really be careful because things are not always as they seem. What do you see in this picture? How would you describe what it is that you see? Now take a look at what this additional information can provide you. We often leap to conclusions based on just a little bit of information because it may be something that we've seen before. It only begins to tell the story. So it's important to understand how this happens. Research has shown that assumptions really largely occur at the unconscious level very, very quickly. And our brains are constantly scanning for information that allows us to look for patterns of similar experiences that we've had in our lives where we can compare and make some conclusions. Our brains are actually not able to distinguish between something that is quote-unquote real happening or something that we may be imagining. So we fill in the gaps and believe that it's real. Let me give you a quick exercise that I think will help illustrate this. It's a very simple exercise. It would be helpful if you have a piece of paper and a pencil. If not, then just imagine this in your head. All I'd like you to do, and of course I'm making an assumption that you're familiar with Roman numerals, is to write down the Roman numeral for the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. Did you write I for 1, I for 2, I for 3, and IV for 4? Are you sure about that? Take a look at these clock faces. Note the number 4. Part of what our assumption was is that, well, gee, it's always been that way. I've always seen that before. But now as you start to look at clock faces around your individual journeys, you'll see that most of the time on clocks, the Roman numeral 4 is represented as I. There's a lot of myth around why that's true. But now you will start making an assumption that on all clock faces, there will be I instead of IV. And again, that may not be true, so be careful. Another example comes from Germany. And here they were trying to build a parking lot with very limited space. And when you look at their assumption was that people drive to the parking spots. That limited their capacity to build a very effective multi-level lot that would give them the number of spaces that they needed because they didn't have the actual acreage to accomplish that. The vertical space above then was really not useful to them. So they challenged that by saying, if this is our truth is that we must have people driving to the parking spots, what if you reverse that and say, what if? What if we move cars rather than driving them to the parking spots? And here is what it is that they were able to come up with. In fact, that greatly exceeded their expectations, way beyond what it is that they might have been able to do, more than tripling the kind of capacity that they had initially wanted. So you have to be careful about your truths. Let's understand what it is that's happening in our heads as we're making assumptions and where those truths come from. By better understanding that, you can work against it.